Have you ever stood in the middle of your own life and realized it wasn't yours anymore? I did. The day my husband brought his first love back into our home, calling her family, I knew I had become invisible. But here's the thing, they underestimated me. This isn't the story of a broken wife. It's the story of a woman who decided to rewrite her fate. I woke up to the sound of light footsteps echoing through the hallway. My head throbbed, and my vision blurred momentarily as I blinked away the remnants of sleep. The faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, a stark reminder that I wasn't at home. I was in a hospital room, recovering from what the doctor had called a minor concussion. But it wasn't the concussion that haunted me. "Who are you?" A sweet, cautious voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned my head to see Lucas, my 5-year-old son, standing at the door with a faint smile. Behind him was my husband, Ethan, silent as ever. And next to them stood a woman I recognized too well. She was tall, elegant, and composed, wearing a white dress that made her look almost ethereal. Claire, Ethan's first love. "Auntie, my parents and I are here to visit the patient," Lucas said, with an exaggerated politeness that felt rehearsed. He glanced at Claire, then back at me, his small hand clutching hers tightly. Ethan remained quiet, his eyes avoiding mine, as if he'd rather be anywhere but here. "Auntie," my stomach twisted. I stared at Lucas, hoping he'd burst into laughter and tell me it was all a joke. But he didn't. His serious expression mirrored Ethan's, and I realized this wasn't a prank. It was deliberate. "Lucas, who am I?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Lucas's face flickered with hesitation before he said, "You don't remember me? I'm your favorite child." His tone was cheerful, but his words felt like a dagger to my chest. "Naomi, stop pretending," Ethan finally spoke, his voice cold and impatient. "The doctor said it's just a mild concussion. Don't think you can escape reality by feigning amnesia." Escape reality? If only that were possible. The nurse appeared at the door, interrupting the moment. "The patient needs to rest. Please, leave if you're not necessary." Without a word, Ethan took Lucas's hand and gestured for Claire to follow. As they walked away, a heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft click of the door closing behind them. When the nurse returned, she handed me a glass of water and smiled kindly. "Your husband came earlier to check on you. He's very attentive." "My husband?" I echoed, confused. "You mean Ethan?" The nurse's smile faltered. "Oh, I assumed it was your husband. He's tall, dark-haired, very handsome. He brought you porridge earlier and waited outside while you rested." I blinked, realization dawning. That wasn't Ethan. It was Ian, my younger brother. Unlike Ethan, Ian had always been there for me, even when I didn't deserve it. By the time Ian walked into the room carrying a lunchbox, I was already bracing myself for the warmth of his presence. He placed the food on the table and began arranging everything with meticulous care. "You haven't eaten all day," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "This is your favorite porridge, preserved egg and lean meat. Eat while it's hot." I took the spoon he handed me, my hand trembling slightly as I began to eat. The first bite sent warmth coursing through me, soothing the ache in my chest. Ian watched me silently, his expression a mix of relief and sadness. "You scared me," he said finally, his voice breaking. "When I heard about the accident, I thought I'd lose you." My throat tightened. "I'm fine, Ian. Just tired." His gaze lingered on me, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. The truth was, I didn't want to play this game anymore. Pretending to be the perfect wife, the doting mother, the silent woman who endured everything. It had taken its toll. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, I had made a decision. If my family was so eager to erase me from their lives, I would grant them their wish, but not before reclaiming my dignity and my voice. As Ethan drove me home, Claire's laughter echoed from the back seat, mingling with Lucas's excited chatter. I stared out the window, my reflection in the glass, a haunting reminder of who I used to be. I would no longer be Naomi, the forgotten wife. I would be Naomi, the woman who fought back. As I stepped into the house, the warmth I once associated with home felt foreign and cold. From the living room, the delicate notes of a piano floated into the air. Lucas's laughter, clear and cheerful, mingled with a soft female voice. My heart sank as I moved closer. Lucas, you're doing so well. Your progress is incredible. Claire's voice rang out, filled with encouragement. Peeking through the slightly open door, I saw them sitting side by side at the grand piano. Claire's fingers glided across the keys, guiding Lucas through a duet. Ethan stood behind them, his arms crossed, his expression one of quiet admiration. The scene looked perfect, like a family portrait, except I wasn't part. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped into the room. The laughter stopped. Claire turned to face me, her smile polite but tinged with discomfort. "Oh, Naomi, you're home," she said, rising to her feet. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," I replied curtly, my gaze shifting to Ethan. He averted his eyes, busying himself with a non-existent spot on his. Lucas hesitated, his little face unsure as he glanced between us. "Mom, I didn't know you'd be back so soon." "I can see that," I said, forcing a smile. "Please." Claire's cheeks flushed. She started to speak, but decided against it, instead giving Lucas a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Keep practicing, sweetheart. You're doing great." With that, she excused herself, brushing past Ethan on her way out. Lucas stared after her, his brow furrowed, as if debating whether to call her back. I turned and left the room before he could say. Upstairs, I leaned against the closed door of my bedroom. Taking a deep breath, my reflection in the mirror caught my eye. The woman staring back at me looked worn, tired, a stranger. I didn't hate Claire. If anything, I envied her. She hadn't stolen Ethan from me. She had merely stepped into the void, left by a love that had lat. "You missed dinner," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. His presence was a balm to my frayed nerve. I wasn't Hun. Ian studied me for a moment before speaking. "Naomi, you can't let." I let out a bitter laugh. "Better? Ian, I've spent years being the quiet wife, the obedient mother. I gave up everything for this family, and look where it's go." He reached out, his hand resting lightly on mine. "Then stop. Stop being the person they expect you to be, and start being who you want to be. You've always been strong, Naomi. It's time you me." His words lingered long after he left. Sitting there in the dim light, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this broken marriage define me. If Ethan wanted Claire, he could have her. But I wasn't going to fade away quietly. The following morning, I asked Ethan for a private conversation. We sat across from each other in the kitchen. "The tea, I want a divorce," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging within me. Ethan blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Naomi, don't be ridiculous." I shook my head. "No, Ethan, I'm not. I've known for a long time that your heart isn't here. I've stayed silent, hoping things would change, but they haven't. So let's not drag the for once." Ethan seemed lost for words. His mouth opened as if to protest, but no sound came out. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tea. "This isn't what I wanted." "Neither is this marriage," I replied. "But it's what we've got. Let's end it while we still have a shred of." Ethan stared at me, searching my face for some sign of hesitation. But I was done wavering. I stood, leaving him in the kitchen as I went to pee. This time, I would reclaim my life. For the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest. Packing my belongings felt like a ritual. Each item representing a memory I was finally ready to leave behind. The house that once symbolized a dream now felt more like a cage, one I had allowed myself to be trapped in for far too long. With each drawer I emptied, and each suitcase I filled, a strange calmness began to settle over me. This wasn't an escape. It was a declaration. Ian arrived unannounced, as he often did, but this time I welcomed his presence with a relieved smile. He leaned casually against the door frame, observing the half-packed room before speaking. "You're serious about this," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I am," I replied, not pausing in my work. "It's time." Ian stepped forward, taking a pile of clothes from my hands. He began folding them with his signature precision, a quiet show of support. "You've stayed longer than most would have. I'm proud of you." His words hit a nerve, and I stopped mid-motion, blinking back the unexpected sting of tears. "It's not easy, Ian. Walking away from something you've invested so much in feels like failure." Ian placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes full of understanding. "It's not failure, Naomi. It's courage." By late afternoon, I was ready to leave. My suitcases were lined up by the door, and the house was eerily quiet. Claire had taken Lucas out for the day, a thoughtful move, orchestrated by Ethan, though I suspected it had more to do with avoiding a scene than sparing anyone's feelings. Ethan emerged from his office as I stood in the foyer, his expression a mixture of disbelief and frustration. His gaze swept over the bags before settling on me. "You don't have to do this," he said, the words heavy with something that sounded almost like regret. I met his eyes, unflinching. "Yes, Ethan, I do." He ran a hand through his hair, his composure beginning to crack. "And what about Lucas? He's your son, Naomi. He needs you." "Does he?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. "Because lately, it seems like he's been taught to need Claire more." "That's not fair," he retorted, his tone defensive. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound echoing in the empty space between us. "Fair? Ethan, do you even know what fairness looks like? Because it's been absent from this marriage for years." For a moment, he said nothing, his jaw tightening, as though holding back words he didn't dare utter. Finally, he stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," he said, his tone clipped, but his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. I walked past him without another word, Ian following behind with the last of my bags. As the door closed behind us, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I didn't look back. And the drive to my new apartment was silent, but not uncomfortable. Ian respected my need for space, his presence a quiet anchor in the sea of change I was navigating. The apartment was modest, but bright, with large windows that overlooked a bustling street below. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Ian carried my bags inside and set them down in the corner of the living room. "It's not bad," he said, glancing around with an approving nod. "Plenty of light, decent neighborhood. You could do worse." I chuckled softly, appreciating his attempt to lighten the mood. "Thanks for the glowing review." He turned to face me, his expression serious now. "You know I'll always be here for you, right? Whatever you need." "I know," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you, Ian, for everything." He waved me off with a smile. "Just promise me one thing. Don't let them drag you back. You've come too far to look back now." I nodded, though his words lingered long after he left. As I unpacked my things that night, the weight of what I had done began to settle in. For the first time in years, I was alone. But I wasn't lonely. The silence of the apartment felt like freedom, a blank canvas on which I could finally paint a life of my own design. Sitting by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I thought about the woman I used to be. She was someone who had given everything and received so little in return. But that woman no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned the hard way that the only way to truly be free was to let go. Tomorrow was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my new apartment, painting the walls with a soft golden hue. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the quiet solitude. It had been years since I'd woken up without the weight of expectations pressing down on me. No duties as a wife, no demands as a mother, just me and the possibilities of the day ahead. But freedom, I quickly realized, came with its own challenges. For years, my identity had been tethered to Ethan and Lucas. Now, standing alone, I felt unsteady, as though I were learning to walk all over again. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. It was Ethan. "Naomi," he began, his voice tentative. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, my grip tightening around the phone. "What is there to talk about, Ethan? You've made your choices, and I've made mine." "It's about Lucas," he said, his tone shifting to one of urgency. "He's been asking about you nonstop. He's confused and—" Ethan's voice faltered. "He needs his mother." A pang of guilt twisted in my chest. I took a deep breath before responding. "Ethan, I'll always love Lucas, but I won't be drawn back into a situation that broke me. You wanted Claire in his life. She can fulfill the role you've carved out for her. He's your son, Naomi." Ethan snapped, frustration lacing his words. "You can't just walk away." "I didn't walk away," I said, my voice firm. "I was pushed." The line went silent for a moment, before Ethan sighed heavily. "Fine, if that's how you feel. But I hope you know Lucas is hurting because of this." I ended the call without replying. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Ethan's words were a weapon, carefully wielded to make me doubt myself. But I wouldn't give him that power anymore. That afternoon, Ian arrived at my apartment with lunch and his usual calm demeanor. He set the food on the table and gave me a pointed look. "You've been crying." "No, I haven't," I lied, avoiding his gaze. "Naomi," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't let Ethan manipulate you. You're doing what's best for yourself, and that's not selfish. It's survival." I sighed, sitting down heavily in one of the dining chairs. "It's not just Ethan, it's Lucas. I feel like I've failed him." Ian pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "You haven't failed anyone. Lucas is young. He doesn't understand everything right now, but one day he will. And when he does, he'll see that his mother was brave enough to choose herself." His words sank in slowly, easing the tension in my chest. "You always know what to say." "That's because I know you," Ian replied with a small smile. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Over the next few days, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I contacted old colleagues, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even started taking steps to return to the career I had abandoned for Ethan's sake. Each small accomplishment felt like a victory, a step further from the shadows of my past. But the past, I soon learned, had a way of clawing its way back. One evening, as I was settling in with a book, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, Lucas stood there, his small face streaked with tears. Behind him was Ethan, his expression unreadable. "Lucas insisted on coming," Ethan said flatly. Lucas launched himself into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, I'm sorry. Please don't leave me. I promise I'll be good. I won't call Claire Mom anymore. Just come back." My heart shattered into a million pieces. I knelt down, holding Lucas tightly, fighting back my own tears. "Lucas, I'm not leaving you. I'll always be here for you. But things are different now. I can't go back to that house." "But why?" he cried, his voice breaking. "Is it because of me? Did I make you leave?" "No, sweetheart," I whispered, stroking his hair. "It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Ethan cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Maybe we should go. This was a mistake." I stood, my gaze locking with his. Yes, it was. Dragging him here, to guilt me into returning. That was a mistake. Ethan's face hardened. "He's your son, Naomi. Don't forget that." "And I won't," I replied, my voice steady. "But don't you forget, you pushed me out of that house. You made it clear where I stood in your priorities." Ethan clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He reached for Lucas's hand, but the boy resisted, clinging to me. "Mom, please." "Lucas," I said softly, pulling back slightly to meet his tear-filled eyes. "I love you, always. And I promise we'll see each other soon. But you need to go with your dad tonight." Reluctantly, Lucas let Ethan lead him away. As they disappeared down the hallway, I closed the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. The strength I'd shown in front of them melted away. leaving me to face the storm of emotions alone. But even as I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face, I knew I had done the right thing. I wasn't the same woman who had stayed silent for so long. I was reclaiming my voice, piece by piece, and I wasn't going to stop now. The days that followed Lucas's visit were a whirlwind of emotions. I thought about his tearful plea constantly, replaying his words in my mind. But I also knew that giving in to guilt and returning to the life I had left behind would only break me again. Instead, I focused on moving forward. Ian had arranged for me to meet with a former colleague, someone who is now a senior manager at a thriving firm. They were interested in hiring someone with my experience, and the thought of stepping back into the professional world filled me with both excitement and trepidation. On the day of the interview, Ian picked me up early in the morning. He waited patiently while I adjusted my blazer, his supportive smile calming my nerves. "You've got this," he said, as I fidgeted with my necklace. I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly. "It's been years since I've worked. What if I've forgotten everything?" Ian shook his head. "Naomi, you've spent years managing a household, dealing with challenges that would break most people. That takes more skill than any corporate job. Trust me, you'll be fine." His words bolstered my confidence, and as I walked into the office, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. The interview went smoothly, the questions reminding me of the passion I once had for my career. By the time I left, the manager shook my hand warmly and assured me that I would hear back soon. As I stepped out of the building, the crisp air hit my face, filling me with a newfound sense of accomplishment. I spotted Ian leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and grinned. "How'd it go?" I couldn't help but smile back. "It went well, really well." "See, I told you," Ian said, opening the car door for me. "This is just the beginning." That evening, as I sat in my apartment, reflecting on the day, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Ethan. "Ethan, Lucas is having a hard time. He's refusing to eat and keeps asking for you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, conflicted. Part of me wanted to reply immediately, to reassure Lucas that I was still here for him. But another part of me, the part that had spent years being ignored and undervalued, hesitated. I needed to set boundaries, not just for myself, but for Lucas too. After a long pause, I typed a response. "Me. I'll call Lucas tomorrow, but I won't come back to the house, Ethan. Please respect that." His reply came almost instantly. "Ethan, fine, but don't forget, he's your son." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to respond further. Instead, I set the phone down and closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing. This was the cost of reclaiming my life, learning to let go of the parts that no longer served me, even when it hurt. The next day, I called Lucas as promised. Hearing his small, tentative voice made my heart ache. But I kept my tone upbeat, asking about his piano lessons and school projects. He seemed to brighten as we talked, and by the end of the call, I felt a glimmer of hope that things might eventually settle into a new normal. But that hope was short-lived. That evening, there was another knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Claire standing there, her expression a mixture of guilt and determination. She held a small box in her hands. "Naomi, can we talk?" she asked hesitantly. I stepped aside, letting her in. She set the box on the table and looked at me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now," she began, her voice soft. "But I need to say this. I never meant to come between you and Ethan." I folded my arms, leaning against the counter. "And yet, here we are." Claire flinched but pressed on. "I didn't come back to ruin your marriage. Ethan reached out to me after I lost everything. He said he wanted to help, that it was just about Lucas and his piano lessons. I didn't realize until it was too late that, well, you know." "Do you love him?" I asked bluntly. She hesitated, then shook her head. "I thought I did, but after seeing what this has done to you, To Lucas, I can't be part of this anymore. Her words caught me off guard. I had expected excuses, justifications, but not this. I'm leaving, she continued, sliding the box toward me. This is for Lucas. I know it's not much, but I hope it can make things a little easier for him. I stared at the box for a long moment before finally meeting her gaze. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've seen what real love looks like, she said, her voice trembling. And it's not what Ethan and I had. It's what you gave him, even when he didn't deserve it. With that, she stood and walked to the door. She paused before leaving, glancing back at me. I hope you find the happiness you deserve, Naomi. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Closure. The morning after Claire's visit, I woke up feeling lighter, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. Her words lingered in my mind, not as a vindication, but as a reminder that walking away had been the right decision. For once, the pain of the past didn't feel so sharp. Still, I knew the journey wasn't over. Later that day, as I prepared to dive into some freelance work, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the firm I'd interviewed with. Subject, job offer, senior project manager. I read the words twice, my heart skipping a beat. They wanted me. They believed in me, even after all the years I'd spent out of the professional world. For the first time in a long time, I felt capable, like I could truly start over. I immediately called Ian, unable to contain my excitement. They offered me the job, I exclaimed. Ian's cheer, on the other end of the line, was infectious. I told you, Naomi, this is just the beginning. You're going to do amazing things. I smiled, warmth flooding through me. Thank you, Ian, for everything. I wouldn't have gotten here without you. He paused, his voice softening. You would have found your way, Naomi. You've always had it in you. That evening, I treated myself to a quiet celebration. I cooked dinner for the first time in weeks, humming softly to myself as I moved around the kitchen. The aroma of roasted vegetables and herbs filled the apartment, a comforting reminder of simpler times. As I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Ethan. Ethan, Claire left. She said it's for the best. I stared at the message for a long moment, unsure of how to feel. Claire's departure was unexpected, but it wasn't the solution to everything. My decision to leave wasn't about her. It was about me and the life I needed to reclaim. Me. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you and Lucas can find some peace. His response came quickly. Ethan, Naomi, I made mistakes. I know that now, but we can fix this. For Lucas, for us. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath before typing my reply. Me. It's too late, Ethan. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. There was no response after that, and I was relieved. It was time for us to stop clinging to the ashes of something that had long since burned out. Where in the days that followed, I started my new job. Stepping into the office felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. My colleagues were welcoming, the work was engaging, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose beyond the roles I had once played. Lucas and I began to find a rhythm too. He stayed with Ethan most of the time, but we spoke regularly, and I made sure our time together was meaningful. I took him to the park, helped him with his school projects, and listened intently as he talked about his day. Slowly, the distance between us began to close. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Ian standing there, holding a small package. I figured you might need this, he said with a grin, handing it to me. I opened the box to find a sleek, leather-bound planner. Inside, Ian had written a note. Naomi, this is for all the plans you're going to make and all the dreams you're going to chase. Don't let anything hold you back. Ian. I looked up at him, my eyes misty. Thank you, I whispered. You're welcome, he replied, his smile warm and steady. But this is just the beginning, Naomi. The best is yet to come. As I lay in bed that night, holding the planner close, I felt a quiet sense of joy. My life was far from perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about what the future might hold. Weeks turned into months, and I began to settle into my new life. My job was challenging but fulfilling, and my days were filled with purpose. Lucas and I maintained our bond, and though it wasn't the traditional arrangement, it was working. Slowly but surely, the pieces of my life were falling into place. But life, as always, had a way of surprising me. One afternoon, while reviewing project reports at the office, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Ethan, can we meet? Just for coffee. I need to talk to you about Lucas. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to keep the distance I'd worked so hard to establish. But Lucas was the one connection I couldn't sever. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet. We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. Ethan was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a coffee in hand. He looked different, tired, perhaps, or simply older. The years had caught up with him in ways I hadn't noticed before. Naomi, he said, standing as I approached. Thanks for coming. I nodded, taking a seat across from him. What's this about? He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I recognized as nervousness. It's Lucas. He's been asking questions about why things ended between us. I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my expression neutral. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, Ethan said, his eyes meeting mine. That I made mistakes. That I didn't value you the way I should have. His honesty caught me off guard, but I didn't let it show. And how did he take it? He's confused, Ethan admitted. But he's resilient. He'll be okay. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. Is that all you wanted to talk about? Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. The words hit me like a jolt. Proud of me? He looked up, his expression earnest. Yes. For finding your voice. For standing up for yourself. I see now how much strength that took. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. For the first time in a long time, there was no anger between us, no lingering bitterness, just two people acknowledging the past and moving forward. As I walked home that evening, I felt a strange sense of closure. Ethan's words didn't erase the pain, but they offered a sliver of peace. He had seen what I had endured, and more importantly, he had seen what I had become. One evening, Ian invited me to dinner at a small bistro near my apartment. It wasn't unusual for us to spend time together, but this time felt different. He was quieter than usual, his gaze lingering on me, a little longer than normal. As we finished our meal, he leaned forward, his expression serious. Naomi, I need to say something. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? I've watched you rebuild your life over these past months, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. And I've never been prouder of anyone. But I need you to know something. I've been in love with you for years. The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for far too long. I stared at him, my mind racing. Ian, He raised a hand, stopping me. You don't have to say anything now. I just needed you to know. You've been through so much, and I don't want to rush you into anything, but I'll be here whenever you're ready. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of relief. Thank you, Ian, for everything. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Ian's words. They were unexpected, but not unwelcome. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of hope, not just for a future on my own terms, but for a future filled with love and happiness. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new. The weeks following Ian's confession were a whirlwind of reflection and growth. His words lingered in my mind, not as a burden, but as a source of warmth. For years, I had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, to be loved for who I was, not for the roles I played in someone else's life. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. One evening, as I worked late on a project for my new job, Lucas called. His cheerful voice filled the room, instantly lifting my spirits. "Mom, guess what?" he said, his excitement bubbling over. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "I played a duet with my piano teacher today, and she said I've improved a lot. She even said I might be ready for a recital soon." "That's amazing, Lucas," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. "I'll be there to cheer you on." His tone grew softer. "Will you really come, Mom, even if Dad and Claire are there?" I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. "Of course, Lucas. I'll always be there for you." His relief was palpable, and we ended the call on a high note. But his words lingered, a reminder of the delicate balance I was trying to maintain between my newfound independence and my role as his mother. A week later, the day of Lucas's recital arrived. The auditorium buzzed with chatter as parents and children milled about, preparing for the performance. I spotted Lucas immediately, his little bow tie slightly crooked as he adjusted his music sheets. He caught sight of me and waved enthusiastically, his smile lighting up the room. "Mom, you made it!" he exclaimed, running to hug me. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, kissing the top of his head. "You look so handsome." Ethan approached shortly after, Claire at his side. The sight of them together no longer stung the way it once had. I nodded politely, keeping my focus on Lucas. "He's been practicing a lot," Ethan said, his tone neutral. "I'm glad you're here." "Me too," I replied simply. As the performance began, I watched Lucas take the stage with his teacher. His fingers danced across the keys, his confidence shining through every note. Pride swelled in my chest as I clapped along with the audience, my cheers blending with theirs. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of unity, not with Ethan or Claire, but with Lucas. In that moment, nothing else mattered but his happiness. Later that evening, as I walked home, my phone buzzed with a message from Ian. "Ian, how was the recital? Did Lucas do well?" I smiled, typing back quickly. "Me. He was amazing. You should have seen him. So confident and proud." Ian's response came almost immediately. "Ian." I had no doubt. Just like his mom. The words warmed me, a quiet reassurance that I wasn't walking this path alone. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel the pull of something new. My conversations with Ian grew deeper, his unwavering support a constant presence in my life. But I knew that before I could open myself to him, I needed to fully close the door on the past. One evening, I met Ethan at a nearby park to discuss Lucas's upcoming summer plans. The air was crisp, and the sound of children playing echoed around us. "Naomi," Ethan said, his tone hesitant. "I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know that I respect you. The choices you've made, they've been hard, but I see now that they were necessary." I looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know." He hesitated before adding, "And if there's ever a chance for us to be a family again." I shook my head gently, cutting him off. "Ethan, I've forgiven you, but we can't go back. I've found peace in moving forward, and I hope you will too." For a moment, he looked like he wanted to protest, but then he nodded, his shoulders sagging with acceptance. "I understand." As I walked home that night, I felt a sense of finality. The chapter with Ethan was truly closed, and for the first time, I felt free to step into the next phase of my life. The following weekend, Ian invited me to a quiet dinner at his apartment. The table was set beautifully, soft candlelight casting a warm glow over the room. As we ate, we talked about everything: work, Lucas, and the future. At the end of the meal, Ian reached across the table, his hand covering mine. Naomi, I meant what I said before. I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes. But if you're ready, I'm here. I looked at him, my heart pounding. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt hope. I think I'm ready, I said softly, a smile breaking across my face. Ian's eyes lit up, his relief and joy unmistakable. Then let's take this one step at a time, together. As the night drew on, we sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. For the first time in years, I felt whole. My journey wasn't over, but I was no longer walking it alone. The best was yet to come. The days following that dinner with Ian felt like the beginning of something entirely new. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope, not just for a life free from pain, but for one filled with love, joy, and companionship. Ian's presence was steady, grounding, and every moment we spent together reminded me of how far I had come. Lucas's summer break was just around the corner, and I had planned several activities for the two of us. From art workshops to park picnics, I wanted to make the most of the time we had together. On the first weekend of his break, Ian joined us for a trip to a nearby lake. Lucas was thrilled to have Ian along. "Mom, can Ian come with us every time?" he asked, grinning as he skipped rocks across the water. Ian chuckled, kneeling beside him to demonstrate the perfect angle for skipping. "Only if your mom says it's okay." I watched them from the shore, a warm feeling spreading through me as I saw how naturally they bonded. Lucas's laughter echoed across the water, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was witnessing the beginning of something beautiful. That evening, as Lucas slept soundly in his room, Ian and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, sipping tea and watching the city lights twinkle below. The air was crisp, and the quiet between us felt comfortable, like a language only we understood. "I haven't seen Lucas this happy in a long time," Ian said, his voice low. "You're doing an incredible job, Naomi." "Thank you," I replied softly, setting my cup down. "But it's not just me. You've been amazing with him. He looks up to you." Ian smiled, his gaze turning serious. "And I look up to you. Naomi, you've been through so much, but you've come out of it stronger than ever. That's something to be proud of." I felt my cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm finally starting to feel at peace." "And happy?" Ian asked, leaning slightly closer. I met his eyes, my heart fluttering. "Yes, happy." He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "Then that's all that matters." As the summer progressed, the bond between the three of us grew stronger. Lucas, once hesitant and unsure, now beamed with joy whenever Ian was around. Whether it was helping him with a tricky puzzle or cheering him on during soccer practice, Ian was there, becoming an integral part of our lives. Ethan noticed the shift too. During one of our exchanges about Lucas's schedule, he brought it up. "Lucas talks about Ian a lot," he said, his tone unreadable. "He seems happy." "He is," I replied simply, not offering more than was necessary. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "That's good. He deserves to be happy." For once, there was no tension between us, just an understanding that we both wanted what was best for Lucas. It was a small but significant step forward. One evening, as Lucas was staying with Ethan for the weekend, Ian surprised me with tickets to an art exhibition. It had been years since I'd attended anything like it, and as we wandered through the gallery, admiring the pieces, I felt a sense of wonder I hadn't realized I'd missed. "This one reminds me of you," Ian said, stopping in front of a painting. It was an abstract piece, vibrant and layered, with bold strokes of color breaking through the darkness. "Why?" I asked, tilting my head as I studied it. "Because it's strong, resilient, and beautiful," he replied, his voice filled with sincerity. I turned to him, my breath catching. In that moment, surrounded by art and soft golden light, I realized how much I cared for him, how much I wanted this to work. Ian, I began, my voice wavering slightly. Thank you for waiting, for being patient. He smiled, his eyes never leaving mine. You were worth every second. That night, as we sat on my couch, the world outside quiet and still, I leaned into Ian's shoulder, his arm wrapped around me, and for the first time in years, I felt truly safe. This was what I had been searching for. Not perfection, but peace. Not a fairy tale, but something real. As I closed my eyes, I knew that the best chapters of my life were still ahead. Months passed, and my life settled into a rhythm I hadn't thought possible. My career flourished, Lucas thrived, and Ian became an increasingly important part of both our lives. There were still moments of doubt and lingering shadows of the past, but they were fleeting. Every day felt like a step closer to the life I had always wanted but never dared to dream of. One crisp autumn morning, Ian invited me and Lucas to visit his family's countryside home for the weekend. Lucas was ecstatic at the idea of exploring a new place, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of nervous excitement as we packed our bags. The drive was beautiful, the rolling hills and golden trees, a stark contrast to the city's bustling pace. Lucas sat in the back seat, chattering excitedly about the things he wanted to do: build a treehouse, go fishing, and maybe even find some animals to befriend. You've got big plans, buddy, Ian said with a laugh, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. I'm going to do all of it, Lucas declared, his confidence contagious. When we arrived, Ian's family home took my breath away. It was a sprawling yet cozy estate, nestled between tall oak trees, with a small lake glistening in the distance. Ian's parents welcomed us warmly, their kindness immediately putting me at ease. The weekend was magical. Lucas spent his days exploring with Ian, his laughter echoing through the fields as they raced each other or skipped rocks by the lake. Watching them together, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Ian didn't just love me, he had embraced Lucas with open arms, becoming the steady presence my son had long needed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ian and I sat by the lake, the water reflecting the warm hues of the setting sun. Lucas had fallen asleep early after an exhausting day of adventures, leaving the two of us alone for the first time that weekend. Ian, I began, breaking the comfortable silence. I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again. He turned to me, his expression soft. You deserve every bit of it, Naomi. And more. I looked at him, my heart swelling with a mix of emotions. You've done so much for me and Lucas. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me, he said, reaching for my hand. Just let me be part of your life. That's all I want. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to my eyes. You already are. Ian smiled, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. Good. Because I have one more thing I need to say. I held my breath as he stood, pulling me to my feet. The cool breeze brushed against my skin. As he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, my heart stopped. Naomi, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I've loved you for a long time. Watching you rebuild your life has only made me love you more. You're strong, beautiful, and the most incredible mother I've ever known. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and with Lucas. He opened the box to reveal a simple yet stunning ring, the diamond catching the last rays of the setting sun. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down my cheeks as I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. Yes, Ian, yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, pulling me into his arms as the world around us seemed to fade away. In that moment, everything felt right. The weeks that followed were a blur of joy and planning. Lucas was thrilled about the idea of Ian officially becoming part of our family, and his excitement was contagious. Ethan, surprisingly, was supportive when I shared the news. acknowledging that Ian had been a positive influence on Lucas's life. The day of the wedding arrived, a crisp winter morning filled with warmth and love. It was a small, intimate ceremony, held at the same lakeside where Ian had proposed. Lucas stood proudly beside Ian, holding the rings as I walked down the aisle. As I reached Ian, his eyes filled with emotion. I realized just how far I had come. This wasn't just the start of a new chapter. It was the start of a new life, one I had built with courage, love, and resilience.